What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so a few things. First and foremost, I had intended to finish Green Lantern Blackest Night by the time Halloween ended. But then I was going through and I was like, well, we haven't really done anything with like the Green Lantern tie-in or the Green Lantern core. Now, the funny thing about this is that the Green Lantern mythos is just largely those two titles. That's really all it is. They cross over in terms of like big events like Sinestro Core War, different things like that, but usually they tell two distinctly different stories from two distinctly different perspectives. The issue I ran into is we wouldn't be able to have the entirety of Blackest Night done by the time we finished all the tie-ins if we kept it every Sunday when Halloween rolls around. So we're doing it on our DC days. We get 3 Green Lantern videos a week, or I guess 3 Blackest Night videos a week rather. So if you've loved Blackest Night, you're gonna be hyped. We're still gonna keep our DC Rebirth stuff, so we're gonna have to double upload, which works because like for the next couple weeks, it'll basically be Green Lantern Blackest Night and Dark Knight's Metal on the DC days. So I'm sure a lot of you guys will be over the moon in terms of the stuff that we're gonna be doing. But again, Blackest Night really comes out of the events of Sinestro Core War. That's really all this is. And that's why Sinestro Core War is so important. One of the things that we learned over the course of Geoff Johns' entire run of Green Lantern is that there was this prophecy called the Prophecy of Blackest Night. And the idea was that over the course of the existence of the universe, these different cores would come into existence. The Red Lanterns would come into existence, and the Blue Lanterns would come into existence, and the Star Sapphires, and the, Indigo Tribe, and all that kind of stuff. All these lanterns would rise to prominence. Most all of them would be super obscure and almost nobody would know about them, save for the Green Lanterns themselves and then the Sinestro Corps when they rose to power during the events of Sinestro Core War. But the prophecy of Blackest Night basically stated that there would be this war of light among all the Lantern Corps, and the result is that the Black Lanterns would basically rise and then eliminate all life in the universe. And that's exactly what's happening. The Guardians of the Universe, some of the most powerful beings in existence, knew about the prophecy of Blackest Night. They believed the prophecy of Blackest Night was fear-mongering. It was an attempt to strip Green Lanterns of their power by instilling in them this belief that the universe would come to an end and all these Lantern Corps would rise. And in doing so, Green Lanterns would cease to be as powerful as they once were, paving the way for almost any number of other villains to rise to power. Now, because of that, when Sinestro Core War popped off, and in the aftermath of Sinestro Core War, once we got into Infinite Crisis and those storylines, and once the Black Lanterns started to rise, the Guardians of the Universe kind of looked around and said, well, I guess they were right. The problem is that this created a rift of sorts, because a couple of the Guardians named Ganthet and Sade always believed the prophecy was going to come into existence. And so in order to prepare for it, they created the Blue Lantern Corps, and the Blue Lantern just kind of existed out there. The fact remains here that in the presence of all these Black Lantern rings, when we began covering Blackest Night, we basically did issues 1 through 4 and then stopped and started doing tie-ins. The reason for that is because everything that we're covering right now in terms of these tie-ins, really until I say otherwise, this is all taking place during the first 4 issues of Blackest Night. The other half of this is that almost everybody is encountering this in their own way at the outset. The Green Lantern Corps is encountering all this stuff at the outset. Hal Jordan and those guys are on Earth, they're encountering it. Jon Stewart is actually just sort of pondering the nature of the mistakes that he's made when it came to the planet of Xanchi. Now, we talked about this before. Between 1988 and 1989, DC published a story called Cosmic Odyssey. It was a 4-part series, and it was weird. It was a really weird story written by Jim Starlin, but it basically detailed this idea that there was just some being called Anti-Life, more or less, that had split itself into 4 parts and it had gone to 4 different planets. But the idea was that Jon Stewart was a relatively new and pretty reckless Green Lantern when he was younger, and the result was that he teamed up with Martian Manhunter to try to find a way to basically keep Xanchi from being destroyed, due to the fact that if 2 of these planets were obliterated, the universe would be destroyed in its entirety. He basically screwed up, ran headlong into it, found this giant bomb in the middle of the planet, was too late to save it, and everybody on the planet died. Now, the funny thing about Jon Stewart is that he is basically a Green Lantern that did not initially rise to any real significant measure of popularity until Justice League came out in 2001. He was introduced 30 years earlier, in 1971. He basically served as a backup character throughout the entirety of the Green Lantern run, running all the way up through Emerald Twilight. He had involvement in all those stories, 0 Hour, Crisis in Time, and so on and so forth, up until Green Lantern Rebirth, which is where he began to increase in popularity even more among among comic book readers, just because of the fact that his popularity in Justice League, the cartoon show, and then Green Lantern Rebirth basically set him to one of the higher echelons of characters. But the idea here is that because of the fact that Xanshi was a planet that he obliterated, what this does is it basically tells us that there is no limit to what it is that the Black Lantern rings can resurrect. They can recreate anything. Xanshi itself is resurrected as an entire planet to serve the purpose of operating alongside the Black Lanterns. Now, this will eventually go into like Jon Stewart's own sub-story that will lead into the main Blackest Night story and actually see him do some pretty cool stuff. But what we end up doing here is we switch over to Zamaron, where the home of the Star Sapphires, as well as the Sinestro Corps. Now, one thing to keep in mind is in the aftermath of the Sinestro Corps War, there were a couple of things that had taken place. The first is that Sinestro himself had basically been defeated and captured, and the result was that the Green Lanterns were intent on taking him back to Oa to be put on trial. The problem with this was that in the middle of it all, the Green Lanterns were ambushed by a combination of the Red Lanterns, those who, survived the Sinestro Corps War, and even the Blue Lanterns themselves. And it led into this great big huge conflict, which I have a video on that you can check out down in the description. This is stuff that I suggest you check out the Green Lantern playlist just to get the full, explanation of it. But the idea was that Atrocitus, the leader of the Red Lanterns, simply wanted to obliterate all lanterns in existence, wanted to just get rid of them all in their entirety. The idea was that this led into a series of skirmishes that took place between the Sinestro Corps, the Red Lanterns, the Blue Lanterns, the Green Lanterns. In addition to all this, one of the members of the Sinestro Corps named Amon Sur, the son of Abin Sur, who first gave Hal Jordan his Green Lantern, Amon Sur had basically eliminated the entire family of one of the Green Lanterns. And the result was that this Lantern's friend had basically discovered what was going on, and in her wrath, killed Amon Sur despite the fact that he was basically surrendering. The result was that Lyra herself was ousted from the Green Lanterns, and in her rage was given a Red Lantern ring. And then that led into the whole skirmish of the Green Lantern showing up, the Sinestro being captured, so on and so forth. In an effort to basically try to turn Lyra away from being a Red Lantern because of the fact that she was one of the original Green Lanterns, Thal Sinestro had actually killed her while Hal Jordan was trying to reason with her. Hal Jordan eventually became a Red Lantern, different things like that. But this all basically goes towards this idea that the Sinestro Corps itself was experiencing what amounted to a civil war, in the sense that you had Thal Sinestro, who had finally been captured by the Green Lanterns and was being held prisoner. While that was going on, a villain named Mongol, who is by and large as strong, if not stronger than Superman, depending on what stories you're reading, was given a Yellow Lantern ring himself, and then basically co-opted leadership of the Sinestro Corps and took it over in Sinestro's absence. And so what you basically had were members of the Sinestro Corps who were loyal to Mongol and those who were loyal to Sinestro. The result was that when everything popped off and when everything started going to pot and it all started going awry, Sinestro made his escape, he was out, he grabbed those who were faithful, and then tracked down the Star Sapphires, which leads us here. Now, the reason why he's here for these Star Sapphires is because of the fact that these Star Sapphires are based on love. And so what they did is they took a whole bunch of members of the Sinestro Corps and they started putting them in these crystals of sorts that would basically convert them to Star Sapphires. Sinestro showing up here simply serves the purpose of grabbing, his members of the Sinestro Corps, bringing them back, and then eventually going back, killing Mongol, and then taking back over his Sinestro Corps. Again, with this idea of the Red Lanterns transitioning back to Ismail, this is still the aftermath of all this stuff. Lyra's still dead, the Green Lanterns are still trying to make their escape, they're dealing with the Red Lanterns themselves, and then suddenly Black Lantern rings just start descending on everyone. So again, that's why there's so much back and forth here. That's why there's so much jumping around, is because we're talking about a war across the universe with these Black Lantern rings seemingly showing up out of nowhere. Now, the other half of this is that Star Sapphires effectively have the ability to tap into the emotions of people by way of love. And an attempt that's made by Carol Ferris, who was formerly a lover of Hal Jordan, the first Star Sapphire, and then ultimately rechristened with the Star Sapphire gem again, is that she had actually encased Sinestro in this crystal of love, more or less, and tried to convert him, or tried to begin the process of converting him. Now, under normal circumstances, what happens is that if a person's not powerful enough, when they're encased in crystal, they'll basically just kind of begin to shut down, go into a comatose state, and the conversion process will begin. But they can still resist it. They can refute the conversion. This is designed to show us how powerful Sinestro is, that where the other members of the Sinestro Corps are trying to resist this conversion, and it's taking quite a lot of time for it to happen, as soon as he's put into a crystal by Carol Ferris, he immediately shatters out of it, because it's basically this idea that he is, in a lot of ways, the walking, talking, living embodiment of fear. Now, the problem with this is that in the middle of their skirmish, much like the skirmish between the Red Lanterns and the Green Lanterns and all that stuff, we're basically met with the arrival of the Black Lanterns. And so again, that's why I say all this takes place over the course of the first 4 issues, is because this is basically basically all these different groups in the middle of their ongoing conflicts, basically in the middle of this war of light, and then suddenly the Black Lanterns start appearing out of nowhere. The other half of this is the Orange Lantern Larfleeze, who's basically kind of an outlier. When it comes to all the Lantern Corps that exist in DC Comics, they effectively have this governing rule in the sense that only those who are able to overcome great fear can become Green Lanterns. Only those who are basically able to manipulate fear and use that fear to empower themselves can become Sinestro Corps members, so on and so forth. Larfleeze is not like any of the other corps. Larfleeze is the Orange Lantern of greed, of avarice. And so the idea is that he has the whole of the Lantern Corps power to himself, which makes him insane in terms of the kind of things that he can do. But the idea here is that because the Blue Lanterns were so intriguing to Larfleeze, when the opportunity arose, which we had covered previously, for him to basically capture the Blue Lanterns, when he was introduced to the idea that they exist, he basically took all of his constructs and just sent them all directly to the Blue Lanterns themselves. Now that's the inherent difference between Larfleeze as an Orange Lantern and everybody else. All the other Lantern Corps have multiple members, the Blue Lanterns, the Red Lanterns, the Green Lanterns, Yellow Lanterns, but with Larfleeze, his corps consists of constructs. Anyone he's ever killed becomes a construct. They become something for him to control. The problem with this is that, again, with Larfleeze having killed so many people, his base of operations is a giant graveyard. It means when Black Lantern rings start descending onto Larfleeze's base of operations, it's nothing but Black Lanterns that start rising everywhere. It's just him by himself, but his power is extreme, and we'll actually find out just how powerful he is in the next few videos or so. But the idea is that, again, this is why the Blue Lanterns are fighting the Orange Lanterns, is because it's the constructs of Larfleeze trying to overpower the Blue Lanterns and then take their rings from them so he can just hoard the rings for himself. It's just this giant treasure trove, that he essentially keeps around. And so the idea here is that with this war of light going on, with the Black Lanterns rising themselves, what it does is it begins to shift its focus to the idea of the Indigo Tribe. Now, before we jump into that, what we actually end up doing is picking up with the Green Lantern Corps line of stories, which is to say all the other Green Lanterns that are out there minus Hal Jordan. And the idea here is that this picks up in the aftermath of a story called Emerald Eclipse. Now, Emerald Eclipse we didn't cover, we didn't really have a reason to, just because the entire basis of the story we could explain later on within the span of 5 or 6 minutes. But the whole idea of Emerald Eclipse is it was basically DC finally finding a way to deal with the character of Sodom Yat. For those of you guys who don't know, Sodom Yat is what's called a Daxamite, and Daxamites live on the planet Daxam. Somewhere along the line in DC's history, some Kryptonians basically left the planet of Krypton and then took up residence on Daxam. Over time, they basically became xenophobic. The result is that as time progressed, if somebody from another planet or something like that showed up on their home, they would basically be destroyed or something along those lines. Sodom Yat hails from that race of people. Much like Superman, if he's exposed to a yellow sun, he'll develop Superman powers. The idea was that as a child, he had come across what amounted to a spacefaring explorer crash landing on his home world, and his actual existence was kept hidden away from everybody just so that they wouldn't, freak out when he was there. But through this explorer, Sodom Yat learned about the greater universe, about the Green Lantern Corps and all these different races that exist out there and so on and so forth. The problem was that when this explorer was discovered, he was basically taken, killed, and stuffed by the Daxams themselves. This created an absolute hatred for his own race and their xenophobic views at the hands of Sodom Yat. In response to this, when he was given the opportunity to become a Green Lantern, he immediately took it. Now, he became significant in the Green Lantern mythos for 2 reasons. The first is because it was believed that if someone like Superman ever became a Green Lantern, they'd be the most powerful lantern in existence, because it's basically the powers of Superman combined with the powers of a lantern ring, and so that would be hitherto almost unchecked powers. The other half of this is that he was destined to become the new Ion. When DC originally launched the events of Emerald Twilight and 0 Hour Crisis in Time, Hal Jordan became possessed by Parallax, all that kind of good stuff, he eliminated almost the entirety of the Green Lantern Corps. Kyle Rayner basically became a being called Ion, which basically allowed him to house the entity in the sense that he was basically able to single-handedly resurrect the entirety of the Green Lanterns. That's what the Ion entity is. Should all the Green Lanterns be killed, the Ion can bring them all back. He can basically bring back the Guardians and the Central Power Battery and all that kind of stuff. The whole idea is that because Sodom Yat was so powerful, during the events events of Mongol running the Sinestro Corps. He basically invaded the planet of Daxam. Sodom Yad intervened, and in the midst of it all, basically took the red sun or flew himself into the red sun, and then used his own energies and converted it into a yellow sun, gave all of his people Superman powers, and they fought off the Sinestro Corps. And that's basically it. That's the gist of it. But the idea is that he was believed to have been left for dead. He was believed to have died. Now he didn't, and he'll come back during the events of Brightest Day. But at the time, he was believed to have been gone, and it allowed DC to put him on the back burner. But while there isn't a whole lot of meat and potatoes to the Green Lantern Corps story, what this basically does, or at least in terms of this story, is it deals with the idea that with these Black Lantern rings descending on all these different people, everybody's having to deal with it in their own way. For the character of Kyle Rayner, he basically sees this sort of reincarnation of the character Jade, the daughter of the Green Lantern Alan Scott, who Kyle Rayner had been in love with and who had ultimately died. Because of the fact that Jade, alongside almost all the other girlfriends that he's had, have all perished in tragic circumstances, it's a haunting factor of Kyle Rayner. That's one of the reasons why he never really gets into relationships, or if he does, it's tedious, because for him, he's always afraid the girlfriend he has is going to get quote unquote stuffed in a refrigerator. That's the big concern that goes on in his mind when it comes to other people. The other half of this is it actually shows how sadistic the Black Lanterns are, in the sense that they actually bust into a infirmary for the most part, where all these Green Lanterns are healing from various injuries, the conflicts they've been in, and they literally go in and just start tearing out their hearts. I mean, it's pretty intense in terms of what it is that they end up doing here. But again, this is the first appearance of the Black Lantern rings to a vast majority of the Green Lantern Corps. So again, it's pretty cool in terms of how it all unfolds. But jumping back to Sinestro, jumping back to the Black Lanterns, the fact that these Black Lanterns are basically emerging, two of the most important ones come in the form of Amon Sur and Aaron Sur. Now, Aaron Sur was at one time the only person that Sinestro had actually loved, and Saranac Natu is the daughter of Aaron Sur and Sinestro himself. We learned that during the events of God, I want to say it was when the Red Lanterns captured Sinestro himself. But the idea here is that facing off against these Black Lanterns, keep in mind, the Black Lanterns themselves basically feed on emotion. The whole idea is that they are basically emotional batteries, in the sense that they force all these different people they come across to feel fear or rage or whatever the case may be. And those emotions charge up that person's heart. And when that person's heart is charged, the Black Lanterns take their hearts, consume them, and all that energy feeds the central power battery. The reason why that's important is because when the central power battery is at 100%, the entity that represents the Black Lantern Corps is Necron himself, and it will allow him to enter the realm of the living. That's why this is a huge deal. And so again, that's why this is so huge, is because in the middle of this all, the Indigo Tribe finally steps in. And the whole goal here is for them to essentially be the voice of reason, the voice of logic. And they will be the ones who will basically come together and say, we have to unite the Lantern Corps against the Blackest Night. We cannot let them battle, because if we do, then what this will do is it will basically live up to the prophecy. And so with that in mind, the Indigo Tribe, Indigo One, at least the leader of the Indigo Tribe, basically grabs Sinestro and takes him directly to Mongol, because the whole idea here is to eliminate Mongol and reunite the Sinestro Corps, because they need every single living member of every single Lantern Corps and more to defeat the Black Lanterns. It's a coming together of every living being in existence to fight off against the Black Lanterns and have it come to a head in a massive battle. Sinestro is just one with his own Lantern Corps. He knows how to use it in a way that nobody else does. Mongol is just this heavy hitter. He's just this slugger. That's really all it is. He's really, really smart and he's very capable, but he's not a master of the Sinestro Corps. Sinestro actually overpowers and eliminates Mongol right off the bat. And so what this does is it basically leads into this idea that we're going to see the return of the Sinestro Corps, and we're eventually going to see a continued call to arms. All these Lantern Corps coming together to join the Earth's superheroes and face off against the Black Lantern Corps, which will ultimately lead into the rise of the White Lanterns. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.